Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is an audiovisual recording for the reading on Unit 2, Lesson 4, where we're going to be looking at the Constitution, in particular to the Second Amendment. As you're aware, the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms is really controversial, but this reading pretty much summarizes both sides of this issue and it encourages you, the reader and citizen, to think about what side you stand on this hot topic debate. Before we get started, please let me encourage you to open up to the part of the lesson that has why we're still arguing about gun control, and of course get ready to answer the key concept questions. Remember, you can replay any part of this presentation that you may need for clarity later. Let's begin. Why we're still arguing about gun control. The hail of gunfire in Las Vegas went out for a full 10 minutes. During that time, more than 1,000 bullets rained down on a helpless crowd of 22,000 people at an outdoor country music festival. Stephen Paddock, 64, had turned in his room on the 32nd floor of the Mandalay Bay Hotel into a killing perch. By the time the onslaught ended, 58 people were dead and more than 500 wounded in the worst mass shooting in modern U.S. history. When police finally stormed Paddock's room and discovered that he'd killed himself, they found more than 20 guns, rifle scopes, high-capacity magazines that can hold up to 100 bullets at a time, and at least one bump stock, which is a device that allows a semi-automatic rifle to fire faster at a rate similar to that of a fully automatic weapon. As authorities try to figure out what motivated Paddock, the tragedy has reunited the national debate over the Second Amendment and gun control. The U.S. has had more guns per capita than any other developed country, and far more gun violence. The question is whether stricter gun control laws would help. Congress, like the nation, has long been divided. So here's what you need to know about understanding the ongoing debate. What exactly is gun control? So gun control is a broad term that covers many kinds of restrictions. It can include regulations on what kinds of firearms can be bought and sold, and who possesses or sells them, and where they can and how they can be stored or carried. Gun control can involve the responsibilities a seller has to check a buyer's background and whether a gun sale should be reported to the government. The term also covers limits on types of ammunition and the size of magazines, the part of the gun that holds the ammunition. In recent years, gun control debates have focused on three issues: background checks for buyers, the laws regulating who can carry weapons in public, and the kinds of guns and gun accessories available for purchase. In the aftermath of the Las Vegas shooting, attention has focused not only on assault rifles, which are military-style weapons capable of firing multiple bullets quickly, but also on devices that can be attached to the semi-automatic guns to make them fire more quickly. So what's the state of federal gun control today? So federal law prohibits specific groups of people from owning firearms. The list includes convicted felons, those diagnosed with certain types of mental illnesses, and undocumented immigrants. Since 1994, licensed gun dealers have been required to conduct background checks on potential buyers through the FBI database. This is meant to prevent the sale of guns to someone who's prohibited from owning one. But many small-scale gun sellers claim to be hobbyists who aren't required to conduct background checks. Because many of these sellers do business at gun shows, this is often referred to as the gun show loophole. Another problem, most people with serious mental illness never receive a diagnosis, so therefore they can still own guns legally. But where does the American public stand? Gun control has long been one of the most sharply divisive issues in the U.S. in general. Democrats and city dwellers tend to favor tighter restrictions on guns, and Republicans and people in rural areas where guns are more common tend to favor protecting gun rights. But following the Las Vegas attacks, a political poll found that 64% of Americans want tighter gun laws, while 29% oppose more regulation. There's more consensus on some specific measures. A recent Pew Research Center poll found that 83% of Democrats and 81% of Republicans support background checks for all gun purchases. So what are the arguments against gun control? So gun rights advocates see weapons possession as a matter of individual rights. They say that people have the right to arm themselves for hunting, self-defense, and sport, or just because they want to. Gun owners say weapons can actually make society safer by giving people power to defend themselves. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association, or NRA, the country's most powerful gun rights group, famously said in 2012. The debates often come down to the Second Amendment, which was adopted in 1791. Americans have long argued over its wording: a well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state and the right of people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. So for generations, the U.S. Supreme Court avoided answering the question of whether the Second Amendment guaranteed an individual's right to bear arms or just the people's collective right through a militia. But in 2008 and 2010, the court ruled that the Second Amendment protects the individual's right to keep a firearm. But since the court did say some level of regulation was appropriate, the rulings have only fueled the debate over what limits the government can place on gun ownership. These are some pictures, yet again, you see throughout about the Las Vegas shooting. What are the arguments in favor? While gun rights advocates say arming people makes for a safer society, people who favor gun control say the opposite is true. The more people carry weapons, the more likely it is that someone will use one to kill. In 2015, there were more than 36,000 gun-related deaths in the U.S. About two-thirds were suicides and about a third were homicides. Gun control supporters cite figures that equate high rates of gun ownership with more gun violence. According to a 2007 report called the Small Arms Survey, there were 89 guns per 100 people in the U.S., more than in any other country. Yemen, second on the list, had 55 guns per 100 people. At the same time, gun-related homicide rates are more than 25 times higher in the United States than in any other high-income country. Supporters say tougher laws in other countries keep gun deaths down. Australia, for example, had 13 mass shootings from 1979 to 1996. After a gunman killed 35 people in 1996, the country passed strict guns laws banning many weapons. It hasn't had a mass shooting since then. Gun control advocates say closing gun control loopholes would still allow law-abiding people to have firearms while resulting in far fewer deaths. In other words, they argue, it's not a question of disarming the public, but a matter of where to draw sensible limits. So why are gun laws so controversial? For many politicians, particularly those in rural states, supporting gun rights is critical to getting reelected. Also, the NRA and other gun rights groups are powerful and well-funded, and many politicians don't want to anger them, fearing that additional restrictions will lead to an outright ban on weapons. The gun lobby has become more unyielding in recent years, opposing measures like more stringent background checks, which it once supported. Over the past generation, American politics has become more partisan and regional divisions more rigid. Republicans have become more uniformly opposed to gun laws at a time when they control Congress and most state houses. But what have the states done? Most gun control exists at the state level. Some states require a license or permit to own a gun, but most don't. California, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, and Rhode Island have the most restrictive laws. But in other parts of the country, many states have recently passed laws making it easier to buy or carry guns. Wisconsin has eliminated its 48-hour waiting period to buy handguns. Ohio now allows concealed weapons to be brought into daycare facilities and airports. The wide variety of regulations in different states allows guns to flow freely across state lines. For example, New York has very strict gun laws, but more than two-thirds of guns used in crimes in New York City actually come from states with weaker gun laws. So now what? For decades, any measure to restrict guns has essentially been dead on arrival in the U.S. Congress. Republican lawmakers, often with the support of conservative Democrats, have blocked any attempt to pass new gun laws, even after mass shootings at Virginia Tech in 2007, at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut, and in 2012, and at an Orlando, Florida nightclub last year. With the tragedy in Las Vegas, lawmakers may have found an area of agreement, banning the sale of bump stocks, the device that the Las Vegas shooter used to make his semi-automatic gun fire like an automatic weapon. Automatic weapons are much more tightly regulated under the federal law, by the way. I own a lot of guns, and as a hunter and sportsman, I think that it's our right as Americans, but I don't understand the use of this bump stock, says Senator John Cornyn, a Texas Republican. It seems like it's an obvious area where we ought to explore and see if something Congress needs to act on. But gun control advocates say much broader action is needed. Most of the gun violence and what happens in the country is not because of bump stocks, says Chelsea Parsons at the Center for American Progress, a Washington think tank. Banning bump stocks is not sufficient congressional response to this tragedy. But in a deeply divided Congress, it may be the best place to start. For decades, compromise between Republicans and Democrats on this issue has been elusive. Republican Congressman Carlos Curbelo of Florida told CNN this might be a small but a very important step. So as you guys can see down here real quick, this is gun ownership by state. It says here overall about 30% of Americans own guns, but the rates vary widely among states. Keep in mind that these are reported and registered guns. The dark blue here represents 50% and above of gun ownership of the population. And then, of course, the lighter blue, you have to adjust your perception of this accordingly. Lighter the blue down here to the scale of almost close to white, less than 20% of the population. There are countries with mass shootings from 1966 to 2012. The United States, of course, comes here at the most, followed by Philippines, Russia, Yemen, and France. And so it's pretty clear to see that in the midst of overcoming these mass shootings and tragedies, and they are tragedies, that it is quite interesting to see that there's still political divide that happens to hinder any progress on what to do with this issue. Once again, the question really does remain, what is the issue? Is it the gun, or is it the person behind the gun, the cultural and societal norms that they're exposed to, and the factors that cause them to act in such a way? Only time will tell, and you will tell, whether or not this is something that needs to be looked at even further. I believe for one of the questions as well, you have a question about the political cartoon at the top. I just want to take a few moments of your time to talk about that. As you can see here, here's the Second Amendment as defined by the Founding Fathers, and now is the Second Amendment as defined by the NRA. You can clearly see some contrast here. You can interpret that for yourself to answer the key concept question. And over here is another political cartoon. It says gun control for dummies, before, law-abiding citizen and criminal, and now, of course, the criminal over here, and the law-abiding citizen has nothing. So these cartoons and this type of perspective on this article really gets you guys thinking about the future and what gun control really would or should be like moving forward. So please remember to answer the key concept questions and then move on to the rest of the lesson. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found this to be helpful.